Hi, hello, how are you? Good morning, evening, or afternoon to whoever follows this channel, cristeromorderno.com, where we follow about the Bible and different parts of Catholic history, as well as biblical history, among other areas. Right here, today we're going to talk about Psalm chapter 3. Uh, and I'm sure you've heard the sad news. The sad history of Israel still continues, which we're going to briefly talk along our study of Psalm chapter 3. That being said, now to a few things of importance before we start today's study. When I look at the Psalms, I always like to compare it with the Hebrew, not so much about bragging or this or that. It's not about that. But when we study scripture, we need to look at it in its total context. And there's a lot of parts in context, especially in the Psalms, that are lost if you do not take into account the, the word choice that God inspired David as he was writing the Psalms. We will see some of these as we read today. Keep in mind, the Psalms was not originally written in English or Spanish. The Psalm was written 3,000 years ago by a very famous king in Israel called David. As I said, he lived 3,000 years ago. Now, the original language of the Psalms is Hebrew, in which tongue the name of the book is Tehillim, which literally translates as praises. Now, each individual psalm is called a mazmor, which comes from the word zamar, which means a melody. This tells us that the psalms were intended to be not just recited normally, not just read normally. They were intended to be songs of praise. Sadly, the original melody, the original music was lost in time. However, the role of music directors in religious circles, all three areas, Jewish, Protestant, and Catholic, is very important. Many of them have come up with ways how to revive these beautiful praise songs. There's a psalm or a mazmor for each thing that for each emotion that we go through. Today's though, Psalm number 3 connects with a special problem that King David had, which rings true, sadly, as of this weekend, it still continues to ring through. It is important to understand that each of the Psalms was composed in a specific context. So before we talk any more about the context, let's look at the first verse. We're going to see it first in English, and then we're going to look at the Hebrew, look at the structure of the word in Hebrew, of the psalm in Hebrew, and discuss each verse one at a time. So let's start with Psalm chapter 3, verse 1. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open them. I'm using the New International Version because I do not trust the King James Version due to a lot of changes that have been done that really make it. I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to make a different video about that when the time comes. So we see in verse 1, it actually says, Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? But we actually see a title, a Psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. Before we look at the context and what this has to do with Absalom, let's make a pause here and let's look at it in Hebrew now, so that we can get a deeper meaning based on the structure of this actual verse in its Hebrew. Uh, and in it we see that it tells us the following. Mazmor de David, Psalm of David, melody. We see here's the word mazmor. Mazmor de David, a psalm belonging to David. But there, but there a whole, no, but para ho mifne Absalom beno. Here we see the root berech, which means to run away. But baracho, when he fled, mifne Absalom beno, from the face of Absalom, his son. In other words, when King David was running away from his own son, Absalom. What is this important? Hold on. Yahweh ma rabbe sarai. Notice this word, Yahweh. This word does not say Jehovah. That is a very big mistake. The name of God is not Jehovah. In the Hebrew, it does not show up as Jehovah. Now, so I know there are some people watching this who might say, but look, there's a Sheva, which is A, and then there's a Vav, which is a W, and then we have this little mark here, which is called a Kamat, which sounds like an A. That much is true. But when the rabbis who were commissioned to to develop the Septuagint put all these marks here for the vowel, do you see these dots and lines under each of the letters? Those are the vowels. They did not put them under the name of God at all because they did not want us pronouncing the name of God. However, the Bible Society came about and seeing that there were no vowel marks in the word on this holy name at all, they saw it as an opportunity to finish perverting the name of God. You see, the word Jehovah is an idol worshipped by the Freemasons. These Freemasons um, developed what is now the King James Version, as well as most other Protestant Bibles. And when they saw that the rabbis did not put these vowels to this holy name, they're like, oh, let's use this as our favor. And they put the vowels to try and twist it to say Jehovah. But the correct pronunciation has always been Yahweh. Yahweh ma rabu tsarai. We see here we have the verb rabah, which means to increase, but we see it in plural. Oh, my enemies. Tsarai means anything that oppresses me, my oppressors, so my stressors. Those who oppress me have increased. Wait a minute, but wasn't King David a king? Yes, hold on. Rabim kamim elai. Many of them who kamim elai. There are two words to talk about standing up. Right here we're talking about kamim, which means a physical standing up. There's also amad, which would be standing in attention. Right? He's talking about people who are generally, not only in a specific time, but generally against them. Now, we see, based on the title, we see that the first half of the first verse is usually the title. And it's telling us clearly that he wrote this when he was running away from his son, Absalom. Now, I'm not going to go into the specific chapter and verse because of the interest of time, but this is one giving us the situation. Um, King David, who spent a lot of time out fighting Philistines and protecting the borders of Israel. But he spent very little time establishing father-son relationship with his own children. Now, his oldest son was Absalom. When Absalom was old enough to claim the throne, he declared a civil war against his own father. Absalom the oldest son of King David, declared war because he wanted to dethrone his own father, David, and take the kingdom up for him. Absalom was so greedy for power, he tried to assassinate his own father, King David. However, David, being Absalom's father, refused to confront his own son because David did not want to see his own flesh and blood, that is, the flesh and blood of his own son, um, spilled on the ground. He didn't. David normally never fled from a war. He was always, whenever confronted by a war, he would always be there, except this case, because this case, the person who was running to have war against him was his own son, Absalom, who had rebelled and tried to assassinate his own father, King David. And the Bible tells us about several chapters where David went through total humiliation because a great number of his army switched over to support Absalom in this coup, in this civil war against King David. So now you have at least half of King David's army switching over to Absalom. So that's two reasons why King David did not confront Absalom face to face. So King David starts fleeing up the Mount of Olives, where scripture tells us one of the descendants of King Saul, his predecessor, started cursing at him. But David remained humble and continued his fleeing. Scripture tells us, though, that during the time Absalom was chasing after his own father to kill him, he was not paying attention where his horse was running through, and he runs into some plants with very sharp branches, which perforate his cranium from the front to the back, and he is left hanging up on those plants. And that was a sad end of Absalom's life. When Absalom declared war against his own father, Absalom paid with his own life. Not because of David doing anything, because David wanted to avoid confrontation, but because, as the commandments tells us, as in the book of Proverbs tell us, if you lift up your hand against your own parents, you will pay for that dearly. Now, this weekend, I'm sure you all have seen in the news the current war that is being going on nowadays. Hamas, the Palestinians, have dared attack Israel. Again, they are trying to eliminate the existence of Israel. Ever since Israel got its independence or reclaimed its independence in 1948, it has been under attack by the so-called Palestinians, who in reality have nothing to do with Palestinians. In reality, there's no such thing as Palestine. I'm going to give you a very quick reason why I'm saying this. That land has been Israel for the past 4,000 years, not Palestine. The word Palestine was invented by Emperor Hadrian as a way to have psychological warfare against the inhabitants of Israel. And it comes from the word palastu. Palastu is the Latin word for the Philistines. And here is where it connects with Absalom and King David. Much of the time, King David spent fighting against the Philistines. Now, interesting enough, those who call themselves Palestinians, even if you ask them in Hebrew, where are you from? They're going to say Philistini. They're going to claim to be Philistines. The word Palestinian in Arabic is Philistine, or Philistines, as some people pronounce it. The word Palestinian comes from the Latin word for Philistine. Even though those who now they call themselves Palestinians or Philistines have nothing to do with the real Philistines. They're all Muslims who have less than 1,000 years there. I mean, this land has belonged to Israel for 4,000 years. Yet in the 7th century, Arab Muslims invade that territory and start snatching it violently from the hands of the Israelites. And they're here around here trying to claim that it's their territory. No. I cannot just break into your house, kick you out, and claim the house to be mine. I can't. It's not correct. Or let's say uh, we have a family emergency and your whole family goes out of the country to handle that family emergency. I find out that you had the family emergency and I move in. When you come back, I'm all moved in. I've got the bills changed to my name. I've disconnected your phone number, reconnected another one to my name. And now I'm saying, this is my house. You're over here trying to kick me out of my house? Excuse me? No. I went into your own house when you were out for a family emergency. The fact that you went out for a family emergency does not mean the house stopped being yours. In the same way that because of all these foreign oppression, foreign occupation of Israel by the Babylonians, the Syrians, blah 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 blah, and even up to the British, that does not mean that Israel ceased to exist. It was still Israel for 4,000 years. There was no Arabs, there was no Muslims there except for the last 1,300 years, not even half of the time. And it is these Arab Muslim invaders who are trying to claim, oh, Israel is occupying Palestinian territory. No, sir. It is the Palestinians who are Arabs who have invaded that territory 1,300 years ago. None of that. So we see that just like David was under attack by his own son, so the same way Israel is still under attack by those who falsely claim to have Palestinian or Philistine blood. That's why King David's prayer right here, Lord, how many have my enemies increased? There are many of those who rise up against me. These were the shouts and the screams of King David 3,000 years ago when his own son rebelled against him. And it is still the shout of Israel today when it's being attacked by the Palestinians who are trying to take over Israelite territory. Let's look at verse number 2. And give me a few seconds. Let's look at verse number 2. Let's see. In English, it tells us the following. Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. Let's look at it in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it tells us the following. Rabim omrim lenefshi en yeshuata lo belohim. Selah. There are many of them saying to my soul, le nephish, there, there is no salvation. Here's where we get the name for the Lord Jesus Christ, Yeshua. There is no salvation for to him in God. In other words, they are telling King David, behold, you've been abandoned. Behold, God has abandoned you. Behold, God is not on your side. As David was fleeing, many people had turned their backs on David and they were now supporting Absalom. They were shouting curses at King David, telling him, you're through, David. Your days are numbered. So King David is very aware of what they're telling him. I'm sure today you may have heard, actually, my son, when I got home from something I was taking care of with my daughter. When I got home, he asked me, what, did the Palestinians win already? I asked him, no, why? Well, Iran is congratulating the Palestinians for a win. One bomb, one terrorist attack by the Palestinians, and Iran already declares a victory for the Palestinians. Why is that? Because the Palestinians have a lot of support from Iran, from a terrorist supporting another terrorist movement. You see, people like Hamas and like the Ayatollah, they think it is a success to sow fear in the other people. We won the war because now they're afraid of us. Oh, really? Is that true? Then why are some Muslims complaining about being besieged by Israel at Gaza? This is the point that he's going to make here. Everybody's telling him, you are through, you are finished. But the David does have a little surprise there. Let's look at verse number 3 and see what surprise does David come up with in his next verse. But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head. Let's look at it in the Hebrew and then look at its meaning. Ve'ata Yahweh, Ve'ata Yahweh, Magan Ba'adai, Kebodai Imerim Rashi. And you, Yahweh, the shield for me, my glory, and who and the one who lifts up my my head. In other words, the previous verse told us that everybody sees King David. You're through. Your days are numbered. King David's rule is over. It's done. But then David lifts up his head and says, you, God, you are my shield. What does a shield do? It protects you. You are my shield. David was running away in humiliation, yet he lifts up his head and says, you, God, are my glory. Even though the King David was feeling humiliated as he was being chased away by his own son, he still felt that God's glory lifts him up. That's why he says, he who raises up my head. What does it mean to raise up your head? Normally, when somebody has been ousted, they're all humiliated, they're dejected, they're like. But that's not King David. King David says, you raised my head. In other words, he's not, even though he has been humiliated by his own son, he does not feel humiliated because he has God on his side. Even though if everybody tells him that he is through, he knows God will take care of things in due time. And guess what, brothers and sisters? God still fights on the side of Israel. We see this. 6 days war. Israel by itself, with barely even any army, managed to defeat so many Muslim countries that were out to destroy Israel. And every time the Palestinians or other Arab countries start declaring war on Israel, instead of taking land away from Israel, which is what they end up, what they try to do, Israel ends up with even more territory. It is said that these people from Hamas have not learned their lesson. You see, when you're fighting against Israel, it is against God you are fighting. And these Palestinians don't even realize that. So, as a matter of fact, this morning at 7 in the morning, as I was getting ready, I hear that one of the missiles that Hamas had sent lands right outside the walls of Jerusalem, missing the Muslim mosque by barely inches. They're bombing and destroying their own holy places. They have declared war on Israel, yet they're not realizing that they're end up attacking their own Muslim uh, holy places. Because Israel has always been protected by God. There are testimonies of soldiers. Real quick, one of such testimony talks about two members of the Israelite army. This was in the 6 Day War. Somehow, they got lost from the rest of their group, leaving just the two last Israelite in that platoon left, because the platoon had gone elsewhere, and somehow they had fallen behind and lost the presence of the rest of them. As they're walking around the desert looking for the rest of the army, of the Israelite army, they find that a convoy from the Egyptian army that was sending supplies to other Arab fighters. Now, these Israelites, not only were they lost, they were also out of ammunition. They're like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Okay, let's go out with a bang. The two of them walk out, aim their guns at the Egyptian convoy. Though the guns were empty because they were out of ammunition, they didn't tell the enemy that. The convoy was escorted by 2 tanks, 20 trucks filled to the rim with Egyptian fighters, and supplies being sent to the Arab. Um, when these two Israelites were expecting that as soon as they stepped out to be shot out, and that would be their end. They quickly found that the people who were driving the tanks got out of the tanks with their hands up. And the people who were in the trucks with their weapons, they got out, put their weapons down, raised their hands up. They finally, these two Israelite soldiers finally walked into their base, having taken this entire convoy prisoners with nothing but empty guns. When these Arab prisoners were asked later on by members of the Israeli army what had happened, their stories are very interesting. The commander who was in charge of that battalion said he saw people all over the mountains covered with people wearing the Israelite army and with wings. Angels wearing the Israelite army, the Israelite uniform. Another one of the members who was holding a machine gun said that he felt his hands paralyzed when he was about to pull the trigger. God was fighting for the Israelites, and God will continue to fight for the Israelites. Moving on, let's look at verse number 4. I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. Let's look at it in Hebrew. In Hebrew, we read the following. Koli el Yahweh. My voice is towards God. In this way means in direction of. My voice goes in the direction of Yahweh. Koli el Yahweh akareh. I cried. I shouted towards God. Vaya anani, and he responded me, Meacher Gacho Selah. He responded to me from behind his holy hill. The mount, the holy hill in the time of King David was the Temple Mount. He was running from Absalom, going up the Mount of Olives, right towards. If you look from east to west, starting on the Mount of Olives, you see Jerusalem. You see especially the Temple Mount, precisely where the Al-Aqsa Mosque now rests. That is the holy mount of God. And God responded precisely from this very same hill, from the very hill that the Palestinians are trying to take over, even though they almost destroyed their own mosque there. God answered who? Did God answer Absalom? No. God answered King David. Today, the people of Israel are crying up unto the Lord, Lord, hear our prayers. Lord, how many are those who are against us? How many are our oppressors trying to destroy Israel? How many are those who are kidnapping Israelite citizens, holding them hostage? But the Lord answers them from behind the mountain, just like those two soldiers I just spoke about. They're crying out unto the Lord and coming out and practically single handedly and with empty weapons took a whole convoy prisoners because God had answered to them and sent his Shebaot, his armies, in support of his people of Israel. Verse number 5. Let's look at verse number 5. What does it tell us? I don't know if you're seeing this, brothers and sisters, but we are seeing that the plight of King David when he was being chased by his own son is being repeated today, but not through Israel's own sons, but through those Palestinian invaders. I lie down and sleep. I awake again because the Lord sustains me. Now, this beautiful verse, hits us in 3 different levels. Let's look at it in Hebrew, and then let's talk about what these 3 beautiful levels are. We see In Hebrew, it tells us this way: Ani shachachti vaishana hakitzoti ki Yahweh yismaroni yismercheni. I lay down and slept. He's not even losing sleep. He knows his own son is out to get him. But is he feeling humiliated? He knows he's being humiliated by his own son. But is he losing sleep over it? No. He's just being able to relax, to rest. I awoke. Okay, he went to sleep, but this was not the sleep of death. He got up the next day. He's not losing sleep over it. And he's still calm and rested and collected. Israel is right now going through this harsh time. But even though they're being attacked, many of them feel relaxed. Not all of them, obviously, they're being in a state of war. But they know that ultimately, God is in control. As he says here, Ki Yahweh yishmecheni. For God has the verb here is samech. Let's see what it says. In other words, I know God is in control. David was saying, I know my own son is chasing me. You see? Support. The verb is samach, to support. He knows he's being persecuted by his own son. The Israelite people know they're being attacked by the Palestinian terrorists. Yet they're calm and collected because ultimately God is in control. There's a beautiful song in Spanish that gets translated as peace within the storm. Peace within the storm. So even when you're feeling the weight of the world upon your shoulders, cry out to the Lord, Lord, my protector, my God, you are my shield. And lose no rest over that which is now pressuring you, for he's got your back. That's what King David is saying in the here. All these people, I'm being swamped by all these people oppressing me. But my God's got my back. He's in control, and he's going to see me through this. When you're going through a personal situation, just like King David did, or like the Israelites are doing right now in that warfare. We live in a world where everything is war. Brothers and sisters, even sitting down to prayer is war. That's what the book of Daniel tells us. But keep your cool because God is in control. There's a story of that there was this airplane going through this terrible storm, and the airplane was shaking violently. Everybody in the plane was terrified. We're going down, we're going down, we're going to die, we're going to... Everything. Except one little 5-year-old girl. The man sitting next to her looks at her and says, "What, you're not worried?" The girl looks at the grown man who's hearing freaking out in tears. He looks at him in such weird ways, like continues chewing her gum, then tells him, "Nah, my dad's a pilot." She felt calm and collected because even she felt that her father would lead the plane out safely out of that storm. Just like this reflects, even though I'm being swamped by my enemies, I lose no sleep over it. My God is in control. Let's look at verse number 6. I will not fear though tens of thousands assail on me on every side. Let's look at it in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it tells us Lo eire merbabot am asher sabib ata atu elai. I will not fear marbebot. Okay, the word really is Rav, which means a lot. But here time we see not just Rav, but Rabab, which makes it a bit redundant. Many, many, a lot, lots. And yet, for a third time, we see the ot ending, which is plural. In other words, I will not fear the many different pluralities of people. It's like thousands and thousands or millions of millions. You see, in Hebrew, they tend to add emphasis by redundance. This is not just a lot, but it's a lot of times a lot. And not just a lot of times a lot, but a lot of times a lot times a lot. We see it, Rav, it becomes emphasized by Ravav, and Ravav in turn is emphasized by Ravavot. All these many people really mean tens of thousands, but it is the best way to translate it to talk about the many amount of people. I will not be afraid even though I am outnumbered, is what it's trying to say here. Am numbered by the people who what? Asher Sabib Ato. Sabib means around, so they have them cornered. They have them surrounded, and they says chateau from the word shat, which means to establish. They have established themselves clearly, or all the way around David. They have David surrounded. They've established themselves firmly. David, so to speak, is being besieged. And even so, David is still not troubled. Verse 7. Verse 7 tells us the following. Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw, break the teeth of the wicked. As we read this, let's keep in mind two things. First of all, King David was a military king. He spent his whole life defending the borders of Israel. And today, if you turn on the news, you'll see why. If you hear the noises outside, I'm uploading this from my place of work, and there are some students who remain for the after school program. That's when the after school program teachers talking to some of the students. Kuma, you see the word kum, which means to physically stand up. Kuma Yahweh, Hoshiani, save me, rescue me, Elai, my God, rescue me. Ki hikita lehi, because you have smitten, you have slapped. That's literally what it's saying. You've hit all my enemies on the cheek. You have challenged my enemies. Shinir Rishaim Shabarta. Oh, and this is not Shabarta, it's Shibarta. It's in the PL form of the verb, which means intensity. That means that the action of God, according to what King David is saying, get up, Lord. Say, rescue me. I'm being surrounded. And what have happened? God responds, and the teeth of his enemy are shibar. They're not just shabar, they're shibarta. That means to be um, pulverized, shattered. In Hebrew has this concept of binyanim, that by changing the first vowel, the level of intensity changes. Like this is the verb shabar, which means to break. But it's not being used as shabar, but shibarta. The first A, has switched over to what we would call it a die. Originally would be a kamat, but they changed it to a hirik, an A to an I. And by doing this, it adds intensity. God did not break the teeth of his enemy. God shattered, pulverized the teeth of the enemy. That's what David is saying. God's protection is effective. The enemies of Israel have dared attack Israel, but they do not realize that by declaring war on Israel, in reality, they have declared war on God. And God will see his people through as he has done for the last 4 or 5 thousand years. The last verse, from the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. Let's look at it in Hebrew. Bear with me. In Hebrew, it tells us the following: Yahweh Yeshua. To God belongs salvation. It is God who saves us. It is God who redeems us. Praise be the Lord, the King of Kings. Al Amha. To God is salvation. Al Amha Berechateha Selah. Upon your people, your blessing. David is looking at God. Lord, save us, your only salvation. Bless your people. This war currently going on in Israel. And also, whatever personal war you yourself are going through, of vice, gluttony, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is, raise up your hands to God.